Kill them all. You have to kill everyone. It's the only way home.
This was the last thing our protagonist, Jess, heard as she pushed the sack-masked killer into the deep, dark ocean. Her friends were all dead, and now, the murderer was too. On this colossal ghost ship, a steel tomb adrift at sea, Jess was the sole survivor. Yet, a familiar cry for help echoed eerily from outside the ship. Looking down, she saw 5 familiar figures desperately waving from beside an overturned yacht. They were her friends, along with another version of herself, her face a mix of terror and hope. Time, here, had been shattered into an infinite loop of fragments. What was going on? To solve this puzzle, we must rewind the clock a few hours. Jess is a single mother whose life is tightly bound by the needs of her autistic son, Tommy. This seemingly ordinary day was, once again, filled with a string of chaotic, mundane events. Tommy had spilled paint on the living room floor again. With forced patience, she wiped it up over and over. Then the doorbell rang, but no one was there. A cheap prank. After this series of draining daily episodes, she silently packed a bag, holding on to a desperate hope for a brief reprieve. A glimmer of hope came from her friend Greg, a cheerful man who enthusiastically invited Jess to a weekend party on his private yacht, the Triangle. For Jess, suffocated by life's pressures, it was the perfect chance to escape reality. The other companions were just as colorful: Victor, a somewhat lost runaway teen who Greg had kindly taken in to live on the boat, Sally and Downey, a married couple, and Sally's friend, Heather, a young, beautiful blonde whom Sally was clearly trying to set up with single Greg. As the yacht sailed away from the harbor and into the deep blue sea, the long-suppressed fatigue washed over her like a tide. She quickly fell into a deep sleep in a cabin, entering a bizarre and fragmented nightmare. When she woke up, she was still disoriented. Victor casually mentioned to Greg that when he asked Jess about Tommy earlier, her reaction was strange, vaguely claiming, "He's at school."
But it was the weekend.
Greg advised him not to be so suspicious, suggesting that her son might be in a special school that required attendance every day.
An indescribable sense of foreboding had haunted Jess from the moment she stepped onto the yacht.
Despite her friends' laughter and joyous party atmosphere on deck, filled with sunshine, alcohol, and music, a shadow remained in the depths of Jess's heart that the sun could not reach. Her fears, unfortunately, were about to become a reality. The gentle sea breeze vanished instantly, and the ocean's surface became a still mirror. In a matter of minutes, the clear blue sky was swallowed by thick, dark clouds. A violent storm swept in with thunderous force. Greg tried to use the radio to contact the Coast Guard for help, but instead, a stranger's voice, full of despair and terror, crackled through the static.
Before they could react, a colossal wave slammed into the Triangle, flipping the fragile yacht in an instant. In the chaos and screaming, Heather was swept into the churning waves and disappeared from sight. The storm came as quickly as it went. When all was calm again, the survivors clambered onto the overturned hull of the yacht, helplessly drifting on the vast ocean. Just as they were on the brink of despair, a huge, ancient cruise ship silently came into view. They screamed for help, vaguely seeing a figure flash across the upper deck. However, the moment they stepped onto the deck, they were met with a suffocating silence. The magnificent ship, named the Aeolus, was a floating steel tomb, completely empty. Despite this, Jess felt an inexplicable, deep-seated familiarity with everything there. It was as if she had been here countless times before. Every corner, every hallway, tugged at a string deep within her memory. From a photograph on board, they learned the ship's name was Aeolus. They were discussing the ship when a faint sound echoed from a hallway behind them. As they went to investigate, Victor found a set of keys lying quietly on the floor. Jess was stunned to realize they were her own. Following the potential trail, they arrived at an elegant dining room. The clock on the wall and Jess's watch were both stopped at 8:17, though the real time was 11:30. This eerie time difference sent a chill down their spines. Jess noticed a blurry figure watching them from the end of the hallway not far behind. The quick-thinking Victor immediately gave chase, and the others followed. During the pursuit, Sally and Downey found a puddle of fresh blood on the hallway floor, but in their haste to find Heather, they didn't pay much attention to it. Jess and Greg took a different path to continue their search. They came to a guest room and were horrified to find a message scrawled in blood on the mirror: "Go to the theater." Greg stubbornly insisted it was just a crew member's sick joke to scare off unwanted guests. Jess was angry and terrified by his nonchalant attitude. She couldn't stand the fake composure in this eerie atmosphere, so she returned to the dining room alone. Just then, Victor, who had run off earlier, stumbled back, his head wounded. Without a word, he lunged at Jess, his hands tightly gripping her neck. In a mix of extreme panic and survival instinct, Jess fought back,
pushing Victor to the ground in the struggle, which tragically worsened his head injury. Victor convulsed a few times before his body went still. Before Jess could recover from the shock of killing Victor, a crisp gunshot echoed from the direction of the theater. She sprinted toward the sound, pushed open the heavy theater doors, and what she saw made her completely break down. Greg's body lay beneath the stage, while Sally and Downey stood beside it, their faces filled with terror. Seeing Jess, the surviving couple immediately assumed she was the murderer, hysterically accusing her of killing Greg and screaming, "You told us to come here." Jess was speechless. Just then, a mysterious sack-masked killer appeared on the second floor of the theater and, without a word, shot Sally and Downey, killing them both. Jess screamed and fled the scene of the slaughter, the masked killer in hot pursuit. She was chased all the way to the forward deck, a dead end. In a desperate last stand, she fought back, engaging in a life-or-death struggle with the killer. In the chaos, she managed to knock the killer down. As the killer fell from the edge of the ship, they spoke in a muffled, yet distinctly female voice, "You have to kill them, kill everyone. It's the only way home." She stood alone on the deck. That's when she heard the familiar cries for help from outside the ship. She walked to the railing and looked down to see herself, along with Greg, Sally, Downey, and Victor, standing on the overturned triangle hull, desperately waving for help toward the Aeolus. Jess quickly turned and hid. It turned out that the figure on the upper deck they had seen earlier was her, now. In a state of shock and confusion, she followed the newly arrived, oblivious group, trying to understand everything. In her panic, her actions revealed cracks in the loop. The keys Victor found earlier were the ones she had dropped in her haste, and the figure they saw peeking from the hallway was this future Jess, trying to stay hidden. Jess encountered the Victor from the new group, who had ventured out alone. She tried to explain the truth about the ship to him, telling him there were two of her and that many people, including him, were already dead. However, Victor just thought she had lost her mind after the shipwreck and didn't believe a word she said. In the midst of their argument and struggle, an agitated Jess pushed Victor hard against a wall. The back of his head struck a protruding bolt, and blood gushed out. Jess realized with horror that this was the reason the earlier Victor had a head injury and attacked her like a madman. She was the one who had caused it all. The mortally wounded Victor staggered back toward the dining room, the trail of blood he left being the same one the Downey couple would later see. Fear and guilt threatened to consume Jess. She fled in another direction, only to run into her past self arguing heatedly with Greg. She fled again, blindly running into a crew quarters. There, she found a pile of crumpled old notes, each with the same message written in the same handwriting: "If they board the ship, kill them all." She tore off a blank piece of paper and, as if possessed, wrote the same sentence. When she compared her new note to the others, she was horrified to discover that the handwriting on all of them was identical to her own. Her mind began to unravel. Different voices echoed in her head. One voice coldly urged her to kill, to complete the cycle. The other voice, full of fear, pleaded with her to stop. In this schizophrenic torment, Jess found a shotgun and shells in a storage locker. She mechanically loaded the gun, then collapsed in tears, clutching her head. As she cried, her necklace, which held a photo of her son, Tommy, fell and got caught on the grate of a floor vent. She reached for it but, in a moment of distraction, let it fall completely. She peered down into the vent, only to see dozens of identical necklaces piled up inside, shining with the light of despair. Another necklace had been added to the pile. Something inside Jess died completely after this. Her eyes hollow, she stood up and found more shells and a burlap sack to use as a mask. She took the shotgun, determined to change something, or rather, to complete something. She returned to the dining room and found the wounded Victor, and came face to face with her past self, who was just as dazed from the shipwreck. She raised the gun, aimed at herself, but her finger couldn't pull the trigger. Herself screamed and ran away. Jess breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she had changed the course of events, but then, a gunshot echoed from the theater again. She realized the loop was still running on its predetermined track. She rushed to the theater with the shotgun, only to see the grieving Downey couple being held at gunpoint by another masked killer, an earlier version of Jess. Jess immediately opened fire on the other killer, and the Downey couple escaped in the confusion. Jess chased after them, handing the shotgun to Downey for self-defense, then turned back to find Victor, whom she still believed she could save. However, after she left, the masked killer found the Downey couple. The killer took off the mask, revealing another Jess's face. This killer Jess lured the terrified couple into a guest room, then coldly stabbed them to death. Sally, who had escaped while Downey was being repeatedly stabbed, ran right into Jess, who had returned after failing to find Victor. A terrified Sally screamed and fled. She ran into the communication room and made that desperate call for help. The same one Greg had heard on the radio just before the storm. Jess followed Sally's cries all the way to the top deck's observation platform. The sight there completely shattered her last shred of sanity. The platform was piled with Sally's bodies, all dressed the same, all dead in the same pose. The only living Sally was huddled in a corner, dying from blood loss and extreme fear. She eventually succumbed. Just then, cries for help came from outside the ship again. Jess numbly looked down and saw another overturned triangle, and a new group of selves and friends standing on the hull. On the lower deck, two Jesses were fighting intensely, and finally, one was killed and thrown into the sea by the other. At this point, Jess finally understood the cruel nature of the loop. When everyone dies, time resets, and everything starts over. She had to be the one who killed everyone to have a chance to leave the ship. Determined to get back to shore, Jess saw the cruise ship drifting farther and farther from the overturned yacht. She rushed to the engine room to try and stop the ship, but to no avail. She went back to the deck and witnessed Victor being accidentally wounded by her past self during an argument. She walked over and calmly comforted the pained Victor in a detached way. Afterward, she methodically began to play the role of the mastermind. She used Downey's fresh blood to write "Go to the theater" on the mirror. She pushed all her companions' bodies into the sea, clearing the scene. She found the separated Downey couple and calmly told them to meet at the theater. This also explained why the Downey couple had earlier claimed that she had told them to go to the theater. After doing all this, Jess, determined to end the loop with bloodshed, returned to the crew quarters, put on the mask, and gathered her equipment. She went to the theater, playing the part of the ruthless masked killer. From the second-floor seats, she shot and killed Greg below. Hearing the gunshot, another newly arrived Jess rushed in with the Downey couple. Jess shot and killed the couple, then began to chase the terrified self who was fleeing. The chase scene from the beginning of the movie played out again, but this time, the roles were reversed. In the end, at the conclusion of this loop, she was knocked down by herself and fell into the cold ocean. Jess woke with a jolt, lying on her home beach, cold waves lapping at her body. This was the scene from her nightmare on the ship. She staggered home and, through the window, saw her son Tommy quietly drawing inside. For a moment, she felt immense relief. However, in the next second, she saw another Jess inside, an angry version of herself, frustrated with life, harshly scolding Tommy. It turned out that the reason her son was startled and spilled the paint was because he saw this returned self outside the window. Jess immediately ran to the door, rang her own doorbell, and quickly hid in the outdoor shed, where she found a hammer. The self inside, not knowing what was going on, opened the door and saw no one. The Jess with the hammer snuck in through the back door and, with a cold resolve, killed her angry self. She calmed her frightened son, painstakingly stuffed her self's body into a large duffel bag, put it in the trunk of her car, and drove away with her son from this home filled with painful memories. However, the wheel of fate did not stop. A seagull suddenly flew into her windshield, leaving a bloody smear. She got out of the car, picked up the dead seagull, and was about to throw it down a nearby embankment when she was horrified to see that dozens of dead seagulls were already piled there. This sight clearly told her that all of this had happened countless times before. She got back in the car and continued driving. Her autistic son became extremely agitated by the blood on the windshield and began to scream loudly. While distracted in trying to calm her son, a large truck suddenly came toward them. After a violent collision, the car overturned. Passers-by who rushed to the scene found another Jess's body spilling out of the duffel bag in the trunk, and her beloved son, Tommy, had also died from his injuries in the crash. A blank-faced Jess, her soul seemingly drained, was rescued by a kind driver. She asked the driver to drop her off at the harbor, quietly assuring him, "I'll be back." She walked to the pier alone, where she was met by Victor, who had just arrived. Victor asked her where her son was. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes hollow, and replied, "He's at school." And so, on that sunny pier, the scene before the voyage replayed exactly. Greg smiled and asked if she was really ready. Jess looked at the yacht and at the friends who were about to join her in hell, and she nodded, giving an affirmative answer. She stepped onto the yacht named Triangle, beginning yet another voyage destined to end in tragedy, all in pursuit of the futile hope of saving her son, a hope that could never be fulfilled.